A pleasant day to each and everyone, especially to you, Ma'am Marian Fernando. Let me first introduce myself. I am Jerwin Galvez from BSS English 1. And the assigned topic to me is all about the structure of sentences. So let us define what is the structure of sentences. Sentences structure is a grammatical component that tells you exactly where and how each component of sentence should be placed in order to blend and make sense. The Collins Dictionary defines sentence structure as the grammatical arrangement of words in sentences. In other words, the sentence structure is what defines the way a sentence will look and the way a sentence sounds. So let's focus on our main topic, which is the chapter 3, the structure of sentence by David Lightfoot and Ralph Fussell. So let me read all the key terms for this chapter. These are adjunction, anaphor, auxiliary movement, binding theory, complement, merger, complementizer, name, phrase, compositionality, continuous, discontinuous, reference, coordination, determiner, pronoun, recursion, phrase, formal, category, functional, syntax, gender, head, reflection, phrase, language, organ, lexical category, poverty of the stimulus, problematic, unproblematic, reference, projection, specifier, universal, grammar or UG, WH movement, WH question, and lastly, the zero anaphora. So let's move on to our chapter preview for this chapter, which is the structure of sentences. Chapter preview. In order to understand the subtleties of sentence structure, it is necessary to understand how phrases are built from the words they contain, how phrases are combined into larger phrases and sentences. It is also necessary to understand what can happen to phrases and sentences after they are built, namely, parts of them can be moved and deleted. Movement and deletion take place under particular restrictions, and speakers know these restrictions, apparently without this being taught to them. All language share these fundamental structural properties, but the principles that underlie them are broad enough to allow considerable differences among languages. The chapter includes a sampling of these differences. We are presenting the structure of sentences with a primary emphasis on their form. However, there has been considerable research about the effect on the structure of sentences that comes from its use by language users. The chapter concludes with an example of this research and how it compares with a more formal approach. So these are the goals of this chapter. The goals of this chapter are to explain how sentences are constructed, explain the concept of poverty of the stimulus, explain the notions, language organ, and universal grammar, present example of subtle restrictions that limit the ways in which sentences can be constructed and interpreted. Present a few examples of differences in sentence structure in language from around the world. Present the differences between formal and functional analysis of sentence structure. So in this part, I will give you an example of the structure of sentence before we are going to proceed to our next subtopic. For example, the word dog has three phonemes, the D, the O, and the G. However, the word shape, despite having 5 letters, has only 3 phonemes, the SH, the long A, and the P. The English language has approximately 45 different phonemes, which correspond to letters or combinations of letters. So, let's move on in one of our subtopic, which is the poverty of the stimulus. Many linguists argue that the capacity to acquire key aspects of natural language is exclusively human. Human language is built on an intricate foundation of grammatical principles. People don't have to learn a lot of what they know about these principles.
The grammatical principles we are talking about don't have much to do with the grammar you learn in grammar school. In fact, you have probably never heard of them, precisely because apparently they don't have to be taught.
So for further explanation, according to Michael Swan, Grammar, Oxford University Press, 2005, stated that because of this apparent poverty of the stimulus, the fact that the linguistic knowledge seems underdetermined by the input available for learning. Many linguists have claimed in recent years that some knowledge of language must be worked in. We must, or the argument goes, be born with a theory of language. This hypothesized genetic endowment provides children with prior information about how language are organized, so that once exposed to linguistic input, they can immediately start fitting the details of their particular mother tongue into a ready-made framework rather than cracking the code from scratch without guidance. So this is the origin of the poverty of the stimulus. An influential advocate of this being linguist Noam Chomsky, who introduced the expression poverty of the stimulus in his Rules and Representations. The concept is also known as an argument from the poverty of the stimulus, APS, logical problem of language acquisition, projection problem, and Plato's problem. The poverty of the stimulus argument has also been used to reinforce Chomsky's theory of universal grammar that taught that all languages have some tenets in common. So moving on to the next, which is the amazing robot basketball player. To get a clear idea of what poverty of the stimulus means, imagine this science fiction tale. Suppose somebody found an exquisitely anthropomorphic robot in a remote part of a desert. The scientists who examined the robot eventually figured out how to activate it. When they did, the robot behaved like a person, but seemed very puzzled about the world around it, as if had never seen it before. The scientists decided to try an experiment, allowing the robot to watch several basketball games. Please don't ask why they would do that. The robot watched a dozen or so many games very intently. These games were very well played, with players seldom committing infractions, and then only unintentional. However, the games were loosely officiated with some violations called, but most not. The robot then was suited up and put in a game. Much to everyone's amazement, it proved to be an excellent basketball player who knew the game very well. At first, it seems that the robot was simply a very careful observer. It was doing everything that it has seen the players do. But then, a particularly observant scientist noticed something odd about the robot's game. Although it did most of the things it had seen the players do, it never broke any rules. For example, it never started to dribble again after it had stopped, and it never tried to run with the ball without dribbling. The scientists thought this was notable because although the robot had rarely seen human players doing these things, it would be very advantageous to do them. Why did the robot conclude that the double dribble and the traveling were not allowed, rather than assuming that the human players simply were not taking advantage of some very useful strategies? Perhaps, thought the scientists, the robot concluded that anything it hadn't seen was against the rules. But this turned out not to be true. The robot had never seen anyone dribble the ball behind his back, but on several occasions, it did just that. How did it know this is allowed? Even more remarkably, on 2 occasions, it leaped into the air and fell on its back while slapping the ball forward to keep it from going into the defensive half of the court, after its team had brought it into the offensive end. This prevented a backcourt violation, but how did the robot know? In the games it had watched, there was never any backcourt violations. The scientists decided to interview the robot. She set up a monitor and showed a carefully selected video of a number of basketball plays, some showing violations of the rules and some showing unusual but legal plays, and asked the robot if what it saw was against the rules or not. What happened next was remarkable. The robot accurately pointed out the plays that were allowed and the ones that were not, with almost no errors. In the case of rule violations, the scientists would ask the robot what rule was violated, but the robot could not tell her the rule, just that the play wasn't allowed. When the scientists asked, the robot affirmed that it has never seen anyone play basketball before the experiment. The scientists reluctantly came to a conclusion that was as unavoidable as it was improbable. The robot had been pre-programmed with the rules of basketball without being aware of it. So I will give you an example of a video clip where a robot playing basketball.
Meet Q, Toyota's 6'10" AI robot that can dribble like a real player and shoot with 100% accuracy. Led to them releasing their first prototype, called Q, a 6'3", 165-pound machine, strapped with sensors, cameras, and advanced algorithms to help Q take in its surroundings and shoot free throws. And it was one of the deadliest shooters on the planet, because Q set a Guinness World Record for hitting 2,020 free throws in a row, earning itself the nickname, the robot that shoots 100%. I mean, to give you an idea, the average free throw percentage in the NBA is 78%. So NBA players aren't even close. Realistically though, Q couldn't dribble, it couldn't dunk, it couldn't even shoot threes yet. Boy, this is where things get freaky, because after seeing how big of a hit Q was, Toyota engineers realized that they had an opportunity to revolutionize basketball forever. So they went into the lab and came out with a demon, because Q was now 6'10", could shoot threes, and even grab the ball on his own. Yeah, the robot that couldn't miss got even better. In fact, Q went on to beat 2 pro players in a shooting contest. And these days, the technology behind this robot's only getting better, because in 2022, a video of Q5 was released, where it's pretty much a real player. You can see him moving down the court while dribbling, passing the ball off to someone, and then proceeding to drain a free throw, a 3-point shot.
So let's move over to our next topic, which is applying the metaphor to the structure of sentences. First, we are going to identify what is a metaphor. A metaphor is a figure of speech that is used to make a comparison, but in a way different from a simile. It makes the comparison as if it was literally true. In other words, it can be said that a metaphor is an implied comparison. So now, let us also take a look at how different dictionaries define a metaphor to have a clear understanding of the same. A metaphor, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, is defined as an expression often found in literature that describes a person or object by referring to something that is considered to have similar characteristics to that person or object. The Collins Dictionary defines a metaphor as an imaginative way of describing something by referring to something else which is the same in a particular way. So, applying the metaphor to the structure of sentences, it is just this sort of reasoning that has led many linguists to the conclusion that people are pre-programmed with principles of grammar. In the first few years of life, children develop cognitive systems that characterize the structure underlying their linguistic capacity. We call this system grammars. A grammar, in this view, is biological, a language organ by Anderson and Lightfoot 2002. We don't know just how a grammar is physically presented in an individual's brain, but the systematic behavior that people display when they speak and how they are asked whether or not certain structures are allowed makes it possible for us to describe the grammar quite specifically. Just as the robot became intuitively aware of the rules of basketball as it watched some games. The grammar emerged when children are exposed to particular experiences, and its emergence is closely guided by genetically encoded principles. For example, English speakers have grammars that allow Kim loves herself, but not people around Kim love herself. English speakers can tell you that the first example is fine and the second isn't, but they can't tell you why. If they try, they are likely to get wrong. They almost certainly were not taught anything about these examples in school. So I will give you an examples of metaphors. These are a few examples of metaphors for your reference. My mom has a heart of gold. My friend's sister, Sharon, is a night owl. My hands were icicles because of the cold weather. You just have to consider the world as a stage and act accordingly. The lip has a stone heart. As can you observe to those metaphors, it is an implied comparison. It is not a direct comparison and does not use any specific words to make a comparison. So let's move on to our next topic, which is the compositionality. So what is compositionality? It is a concept in the philosophy of language, a symbolic system in compositional if the meaning of every complex expression E in that system depends on and depends only on 1 is syntactic structure and 2 the meaning of is simple parts. This is the principle of the compositionality. The meaning of a complex linguistic unit results from the individual meanings of its subparts and how these subparts were combined. This means that the meaning of the sentence is determined by the meaning of the words that it contains and how these words were put together. Grammars, in this sense, have certain defining properties. A fundamental property of grammar of every language is that it is compositional. Sentences are made of clauses and phrases, which in turn are made up of smaller clauses and phrases of words. So this is an example of compositionality. Let's take a man saw Mary. According to the compositionality principle, the truth condition of this sentence is determined only by the meanings of its parts, namely a, man, saw, and Mary, and how these expressions are arranged. So I will give you another example of compositionality. Tom is asleep. Everyone who is identical with Tom is asleep. The synonym of the noun praises Tom and everyone who is identical with Tom. We may conclude that A and B must have the same meaning. So let's move on to our next topic, which is the projection. So what is projection? Projection refers to the feature of human conduct that prefigures possible trajectories of how an action or a sequence of actions might develop in the next moment, and which thereby allows interactants to negotiate and accomplish coordinated action in a subsequent course of interaction. Composing the structure of a sentence begin with words that belong to categories like noun, verb, preposition, adjective, and determinant. These words are the heads of phrases. So let us take a sentence like those children want a puppy as an example. In this sentence, those children is a determiner phrase or the DP. Its head is a determiner, those, and it also includes the noun phrase children. A puppy is another determiner phrase. Its head is the determiner, and it includes the noun phrase or the NP or the puppy. Want a puppy is a verb phrase or VP headed by the verb want, and it includes the determiner phrase a puppy. Children and puppy are phrases too. They are a noun phrase that consists of their heads only. The sentence is composed of phrases, and the phrases are composed of words, even though some phrases are composed of only one word. Current research on grammar assumes that phrases are constructed bottoms up. Words are drawn from a lexicon, a mental dictionary stored in people's brain rather than in a book, and merged into structures one by one. Here's how this works in details. Every word is a member of a category. There are two types of categories: lexical categories and functional categories. Words that belong to lexical categories are semantically rich and contribute primarily to the meaning of the sentence. The common parts of speech, nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and preposition are lexical categories. Words is functional categories are semantically weak and contribute more to the structure of the grammar of sentences than to the meaning. Articles are a subset of determiners of functional category. To build phrases and sentences, we start with words which then project phrases or the same category. You can think of a word as a kind of seed and its projection as a stalk that it sends out. Let's start with the simple sentence, those children want a puppy, and see how this works. The grammar starts by selecting the nouns children and puppy from the lexicon and letting them project phrases of the same category, in example, noun phrases or NPs. So that's an example of table of grammatical categories. So these are the categories: types, word category, word level symbol, examples, phrasal category, phrase level symbol. So let's start first with types, lexical and followed by noun, and happy, park, happiness, noun, praise, and NP. Lexical, verb, V, take, run, be, verb phrase, and VP. The third one is functional, determiner, the, this, the, a, determiner, phrase, and VP. So the next one is lexical, preposition, P, in, on, between, prepositional phrase, and PP. And the next one is lexical. Adjective A, good, red, big, adjective praise, and AP. The next one is lexical. Adverb, ADV, happily, fast, initially, adverb, praise, and ADVP. The next one is functional. Inflection, I, can, press, pass, inflection, praise, and IP. And the last one is functional complementizer. C, that, complementizer, praise, and CP. Take note that preposition is sometimes considered a functional category. In the sentence we are constructing, these noun phrases have no further structure within them, so the grammar can move on to other categories. One is a transitive verb, a verb that is incomplete without a direct object. So if the grammar is projecting a phrase from a transitive verb, it sends up a stalk that branches. So that is the figure 3.1, the projection of two symbol entities, which is the children and the puppy. The projection from 1 is shown in figure 3.2. The figures we are constructing are called tree diagrams because as they become more detailed, they become to look like upside down trees. In other words, one project appraiser node of its own category, a verb entity's praise or VP, and also branches out to another node for the category of its complement. The phrase needs to be complete. We show the complement phrase as a determiner, phrase, or DP here, but it could also be an NP. In a transitive verb phrase, the verb is the head of the phrase. So let's move forward to our next topic, which is the merger. In historical linguistics, mergers are defined as the collapse of a phonemic distinction by one sound becoming identical with another. As a result of this type of rephonemization, words that were distinguished by some difference in sound stop being distinct and become homophones. Once the complement node of the transitive verb is projected, it has to be combined with a phrase of the type it needs. To do that, the grammar must have a mechanism that combines phrases. This is done by merging projection, one phrase with another. Each of the determiners in our example, those and a project's a determiner's phrase, needs a sound or a noun phrase as its complement. The grammar has already projected the two entities in. So that is the figure 3.3. The NP puppy merges with the complement NP node projected from DA to create DP a puppy. Figure 3.1. All it has to do is merge the two entities into the two DPs and the DPs will be complete. The way this works is illustrated in figure 3.3. The same kind of merger produces those children. Notice that at the beginning of the merger, there are two NP nodes but only one NP afterwards. In a merger, the two nodes blend together to form one. We call that in figure 3.2 the verb phrase whose head is one needed a DP complement, which can now be merged into the VP as illustrated in figure 3.4. So this figure is the figure 3.5, which is the two phrases resulting from merges. So far, the grammar has created the two phrases in figure 3.5 by merger.
A new functional category is needed to put them together. This category, called inflection, is responsible for the tense of the sentence among other duties. In an inflection phrase or IP is projected from abstract elements such as present and past tense, as well as modal auxiliaries like can or may. Its role in the structure of sentences is somewhat different from the role of the phrases we have projected so far. Inflection phrases provide the central scaffolding for a sentence, a structure to which the more meaningful lexical category phrases will be attached. In our sentence, the head of the figure 3.6, inflection is not a verb you can hear, but the abstract of elements present tense. The resulting structure is shown in figure 3.6. So this is the example of figure 3.6, the projection of IP from phrase. Even for a functional category, inflection is special, like transitive verbs and prepositions. It projects a complement branch. To be complete, it has to have a verb phrase attached. In other words, you can think of the verb phrase as analogous to the object of for prepositional phrase. In our example, it provides a way for present tense to express its meaning. But inflection phrases are unusual because they are required to project a specifier position. A specifier is an extra level of structure with a particular configuration. There is an intermediate node between the lowest category 1 and the IP. This intermediate node is called 1, pronouns 1, negative bar. The complement verb phrase branches from I, and the specifier branches in the opposite direction from the higher IP. This upper piece of structure is called a specifier, for a reason that was explainable in the earlier versions of syntactic choice, but now is simply a conventional technical term. The specifier of an inflection phrase is the subject of the sentences. Here, a determined phrase. Inflection phrases typically have determiner phrases as their specifiers, although other phrases are possible. So this is an example of figure 3.7, which is the merger of DP and VP into the specifier and complementizer positions of IP. Notice that in figure 3.6, DP and VP have no content to give them content. The grammar merges the structures in figure 3.5 with the one in figure 3.6. The DP containing those children is merged with the DP in the specifier position of IP. This is our first example of a specifier merger. And the VP containing a puppy is merged with the VP. The inflection phrase combines and relates the content of the VP and the VP. The result is shown in figure 3.7. The generation of the sentence by the grammar is almost complete. There has to be a mechanism to get the present tense or the phrase attached to the verb. In this sentence, phrase is not audible, so you can hear whether it attached or not. But if our sentence had been my child wants a puppy, we could have seen the present tense marker in the suffix. Similarly, if we had chosen the best tense, the sentence would have come out, those children wanted a puppy, almost with the tense marking suffix on the verb. The mechanism that combines verbs and their tense turned out to be surprisingly complicated for syntactic choice. So well just stated here that there is a way to get tense inflections where they belong. Our grammar must have one more functional category, the complementizer. The complementizer are words like that in I heard that those children want a puppy, for in she hopes for good things to happen, and if in he wondered if it would be rain. Complementizers project high-level phrases that take inflection phrases as complements. Complementizers phrases, or CPS, are functional categories that allow clauses to be embedded in other clauses. For example, in a sentence like I heard that those children want a puppy, the clause that those children want a puppy is embedded in the higher clause as a complement of the verb heard. Complementizer phrases almost are necessary to understand the structure of questions and relative clauses. In example, the man who came in was angry, as well as in the quotations. In example, he said that those children want a puppy. Complementizer phrase looks like figure 3.8. In a sentence like I heard that those children want a puppy, the complementizer phrase would look like figure 3.9. So this illustration is the figure 3.9, which stated I heard that those children want a puppy. So let's proceed. This is the box 3.2, determiner, praise, and possession. We have introduced three categories that we have called functional. The functional nature of inflection phrases is easy to see, since they serve as the scaffold structure for sentences, holding the inflection and the positions for the subject, determiner, praise, and the main verb phrase. Similarly, complementizer phrases have the function of providing the structure of embedded clauses. But what about determiner phrases? From the examples we have shown, determiner seems just like a lexical category, projecting a praise and a complement branch from a head with some semantic content. One clearly functional duty of determiner phrases is to provide the scaffolding for possessive constructions, like the cowboy's hat. This possessive construction is a DP projected from an unusual determiner. The possessive morpheme spelled with S. The possessive determiner projects an NP complement as usual, and this is time it also projects a specifier like inflection phrases do. The projection looks like this. So this illustration is the projection of a possessive DP from S. So as can you see, this structure looks very similar to a typical IP structure. When the DP or the cowboy is merged into the specifier position and the NP hat into the complement position, this is what we get, or this is the illustration that we get. So let's proceed to our next topic, which is adjunction. So what is adjunction? Adjunction is a phrase which is not necessary to the structure of the clause, but which adds some extra meaning to it. In the sentence, they waited outside for ages, the phrases outside and for ages add extra meaning to waited. There are two methods for building phrases, projection and merger. We have seen how merger joins phrases by placing one phrase into the complement or specifier of another phrase. It is also possible to merge phrases that are not
complements or specifiers of their host phrase. This is called adjunction, and it adds modifiers to phrases. Heads, complements, and specifiers make up the core meaning of a phrase, while adjuncts add extra description. Since adjoint phrases are different from heads, complements, and specifiers, adjunction creates a side for merge by extending the phrasal note of the host phrase. So these are the figures 3.10, 3.11, and 3.12. Illustrate the adjunction. Suppose we want to add modifiers to the subject, noun, phrase, and verb phrase of our example sentence so that it reads, "Those little children in the park want a puppy badly." We would like adjoin the minimal adjective phrase little to the noun phrase children. First, the grammar would project a new adjective phrase or AP from the adjective little. The grammar will create the roof shape structure circle in figure 3.10 that extend the end to children. The new AP will be emerged or merged into this new structure. This is shown in figure 3.10. The merger of in the park is similar. The noun park would project an NP note which would be merged with the DP projected by the determiner. The new AP will be merged into this new structure. This is shown in the figure 3.10, will be further extended with a new roof shape structure, and in the park is merged with that. So in the figure 3.11 shows the process. Similarly, the adverb badly would project an adverb phrase or ADVP, which the grammar would then merge with the verb phrase want a puppy, using the same mechanism. Figure 3.12 shows the merger of the adverb phrase badly with the VP want a puppy. Notice that in figure 3.10 and 3.11, only the head is attached to the lowest NP note, and in figure 3.12, only the head and the complement are attached to the lower VP note. All the adjuncts are attached to the extended structures. In this way, the integral parts of the phrase, head, specifier, and complement are distinguished from adjuncts. Building the rest of the structure of those little children in the park want a puppy will proceed in the following way. First, the NP in figure 3.11 will be merged with the complement branch of the DP headed by those, as in figure 3.3, to create the DP, those little children in the park. The resulting DP and the VP in figure 3.12, want a puppy badly, will be merged into IP as we put to create the whole sentence IP. So far, we have represented phrasal structure using 3 diagrams, which are graphically useful for showing the hierarchical relationships between words and phrases, but take up a lot of space. Linguistics often use a linear format called labeled bracketing to present sentences, as in 1. So as can you see in this format, brackets surround everything underneath a note, and the bracket is labeled with the same label a note in a tree would have. The entire sentence within the outermost bracket is an IP. Within the IP, there is a DP, which are those children, followed by a BP, the want a puppy. The verb phrase consists of one, which we have chosen not to label explicitly, and another DP, a puppy. When they use this format, linguists leave out much of the internal structure of each of the constituent phrases unless it is relevant to a particular analysis. So let's move on to our next topic, which is the movement and deletion. Once phrases have been built by projection and merger, including adjunction, the grammar can apply further operations to them. Besides building phrase structures, syntax can also move parts of phrase structures around by detaching them from the position in which they were projected or merged, and merging them somewhere else or delete them. Movement function by copying an item into a new location, leaving a copy in the original position. This copy must later be deleted. We will illustrate movement with two common operations: auxiliary movement and WH movement, which generate questions. Auxiliary movement or aux movement comes into play when we want to generate a simple question, like does the man like movies? Using the projection and merger functions we've already described, the grammar first generates the sentence in this kind of form. Example 2 shows a complementizer phrase headed by an empty complementizer. That's what the E stands for, and it has an inflection phrase as its complement. The IP has the determiner phrase, the man, in its specifier position. Its head is breast, and its complement is the verb phrase like movies. Aux movement takes whatever I is here in its breast and moves it to the previously empty head position, C, leaving a copy behind. The copy is later deleted, and this is the format, or this is the result. The abstract present tense morpheme is at the beginning of the sentence, far from its verb. Under this condition, the verb do is inserted into the structure so that the tense has a verb to work with. So this is the result or the format of it. Now, all that has to happen is for do and press to combine to form does, and we have the sentence we want. Does the man like movies? So next, WH movement. There's another kind of question called the WH question. WH movement in questions follows aux movement. In WH questions, there is a word like who, when, where, and or how at the beginning of the sentence. These WH words start life within the sentence and are then moved to the specifier position of CP. The grammar would generate the question, what would you like, as in this kind of format. The head of IP in 5 is the auxiliary word rather than the abstract. Press in 2 to 4. We see that CP has two empty positions. The structure of CP that you saw in figure 3.8 and 3.9 has only a head position, which is empty in number 5, and a complement position which is occupied by you would like what in number 5. Where does the other empty position from? For structures like this one, CP has a specifier position just as IP always does, and as DP does in possessive, like in you can see in box 3.2.
In principle, branching structure are never projected. Specifier is needed. In principle, branching structures are never projected unless they are needed. No specifier is needed for the structure in figure 3.9, so none is projected. Here, a specifier is needed. A CP with a specifier has the structure in figure 3.13. When a CP has a specifier, there is a C level like I in an inflection phrase and D in possessive DPS. The specifier position of CP can be filled by a variety of phrase types, but in figure 3.13, it is shown as empty, as it is in number 5 or example number 5 or format number 5. The empty position represented by the first of the two instances of E in example number 5 then is the specifier position. What appears after the verb like as its complement like is a transitive verb and requires a direct object complement, and what stands in for the missing thing that you would like. First, ox movement applies as it did in example or format number 3 above. This is shown by the shorter arrow, copying mold to the head of CP. The deletion of the remaining copy of mold is assumed in this diagram. This time, though wold is an audible morpheme, so we will have no need of do. WH movement applies next, copying what to the specifier position CP, leaving the original entry position empty once what is deleted. So I will show you the result in number 6 format. So this is the result of number 6 format. So why copy and delete? It may seem strange that movement is done in 2 steps, copying and deletion of the original instead of just moving an element. Syntacticians have discovered that grammar behaves as if something is left behind after a movement, that something seems to be a copy of what was moved. If movement is understood as copying and deleting, then it is a combination of merger of something from somewhere else in the structure instead of from the lexicon, and deletion, thus using 2 operations already needed rather than adding a third kind of operation, movement. And that's the end of my video presentation about the topic that was given to me, all about the structure of sentences. So once again, I am Jerwin Best from BSL English 1B. I hope you learned something in this video presentation. Good day and to God be the glory. Bye-bye.